The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant snow. Elias Monroe pulled his weathered coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse down the rocky slope toward home. The Bighorn Mountains loomed behind him, their peaks already dusted white, though it was only late September. Winter came early in Wyoming territory, and it came hard. His ranch sat nestled in a hollow between two ridges, protected from the worst of the wind, but isolated enough that visitors were rare. That was how Elias preferred it. The small cabin with its stone chimney, the barn that listed slightly to the east, the corral where his cattle huddled together for warmth. This was his world now, a world he'd built with his own hands, and one he'd learned to inhabit alone. The horses' hooves crunched on frost-brittle grass as they descended. Elias was 43 years old, though the sun and wind had carved deeper lines into his face than his years alone might warrant. His hair, once dark as coffee, now showed silver at the temples. His hands, wrapped around the reins, were scarred and calloused from 20 years of ranch work. They were hands that had once held his wife's face tenderly, had once smoothed her hair back from her forehead as she lay dying. But that was 5 years past, and such memories served no purpose except to make the whiskey taste bitter. As he approached the cabin, something caught his eye. A flash of white against the weathered wood of his door. Paper. His jaw tightened. The monthly supply run to town wasn't due for another week, and nobody else had cause to ride out this far. He dismounted, his boots hitting the hard ground with a dull thud, and crossed to the door in 3 long strides. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with his name written in careful script. Mr. Elias Monroe, Bighorn Valley Ranch. The return address was from some agency in Chicago he'd never heard of. He tore it open with one finger, squinting at the formal language within. Dear Mr. Monroe. The letter began. We are pleased to inform you that your mail-order bride, as per your correspondence dated August 15th, has departed Chicago and will arrive in Casper by stage on October 2nd. Miss Rosalie Brennan is eager to begin her new life in Wyoming territory and looks forward to making your acquaintance. Elias read the words twice, then a third time. Mail-order bride. He'd sent no such correspondence. The last letter he'd written was to order fence wire from the hardware store in Casper, and that was back in July. Someone had made a mistake. Clearly, he crumpled the letter in his fist, then thought better of it and smoothed it out again. October 2nd. That was only 4 days away. He unsaddled his horse with practiced efficiency, his mind working through the problem. He'd have to ride to town, explain the error, send this Miss Brennan back to wherever she'd come from. The thought of making the 2-day journey to Casper made him grimace, but leaving some poor woman stranded at the stage station would be crueler than facing the awkwardness of the situation. That evening, Elias sat by his fire with his supper of beans and salt pork. The letters spread on the rough table before him. Outside, wolves called to each other across the valley, their voices rising and falling like a funeral hymn. He found himself wondering about this Rosalie Brennan. What kind of woman answered advertisements to marry strangers in the wilderness? Desperate ones, he supposed. Women with no other options. He'd known men who'd sent for brides. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't, but it took a certain kind of faith, or foolishness, to bind your life to someone you'd never met. Elias had loved his wife Clara from the moment he'd seen her at a barn dance in Missouri. All those years ago, they'd courted properly, married in her father's church, made their plans together. Even when she'd followed him to this God-forsaken wilderness, she'd done it with eyes wide open, knowing what she was choosing. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Elias reached for his Bible, the leather cover soft with age and handling. He'd taken to reading it in the evenings, not from any particular devoutness, but because it had been Clara's, and her careful notes in the margins made it feel like she was still speaking to him. Tonight, though, the words swam before his eyes. He kept thinking about that letter, about some woman traveling hundreds of miles to marry a stranger who hadn't even sent for her. 3 days later, Elias stood on the platform of the Casper stage station, watching the horizon. He'd left his ranch before dawn, pushing his horse harder than usual to make good time. The letter was in his shirt pocket, and he'd rehearsed his explanation a dozen times on the ride. There'd been a mistake. He was terribly sorry. He'd pay for her return passage. Of course, it would all be very civilized and brief. The stage appeared as a dust cloud first, then gradually took shape. The 6-horse team laboring up the final hill, the coach swaying on its leather springs. Elias straightened his coat and removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Other people waited on the platform too, a merchant expecting goods, a woman meeting her sister, 2 cowboys lounging against the wall, normal people conducting normal business, while he stood there to disappoint some poor woman he'd never asked for. The stage rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust and noise. The driver climbed down and began unloading luggage while the station master helped passengers disembark. An elderly man first, then a mother with 2 small children. Then, she was young. That was Elias's first thought. Younger than he'd expected, maybe 25 or so. She wore a simple brown traveling dress that had seen better days, and a bonnet that couldn't quite contain her dark hair. But it was her face that made him freeze. Even from a distance, he could see the bruising along her left cheekbone, faded to yellow-green but still visible. She climbed down from the stage carefully, favoring her right side, and stood looking around with the wariness of a deer scenting wolves. Their eyes met across the platform. Something in her expression shifted, relief, fear? Before Elias could decide, she was walking toward him, a single carpet bag clutched in both hands. Mr. Monroe. Her voice was soft, with a slight Irish lilt. Up close, he could see that the bruising extended down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. Her eyes were gray as winter sky, and they darted constantly, never quite meeting his gaze. "I'm Rosalie Brennan." "Miss Brennan." Elias found his carefully rehearsed words deserting him. "I'm afraid there's been some sort of mistake." "Please." The word came out sharp, desperate. She glanced over her shoulder at the stage, already preparing to depart again. Might we discuss this somewhere more private? I've come such a long way, and Her voice trailed off, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Instinct made Elias reach out to steady her, but she flinched back so violently she nearly dropped her bag. He held up both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of harmlessness. "Easy now. When's the last time you ate?" She blinked at him, as if the question was in a foreign language. Yesterday morning, I think, or perhaps the day before. The journey was difficult." Elias looked at this woman, bruised, exhausted, jumping at shadows, and felt his resolve waver. He could still send her back, but not like this, not without at least a meal and a night's rest. "Come on," he said gruffly. "There's a boarding house down the street. We'll get you some food and sort this out proper." She followed him silently, her bag clutched tight. As they walked, Elias noticed how she kept to his left, maintaining a careful distance, how she startled when a drunk stumbled out of a saloon ahead of them. Whatever had happened to this woman, it had left its mark in more than just the bruises on her face. The boarding house was clean and respectable, run by a German widow named Mrs. Schultz. She took one look at Rosalie and clucked her tongue. "Poor dear looks half dead. You sit right there, Liebling, and I'll bring you some good stew." As Rosalie ate, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, Elias explained about the letter, the confusion, his certainty that someone had made an error. She listened without interrupting, those gray eyes fixed on her bowl. When he finished, she carefully set down her spoon and folded her hands in her lap. "There's been no mistake. Mr. Monroe, I sent that letter. I signed your name." She met his gaze directly for the first time, and he saw desperation there, raw and undisguised. "I needed to leave Chicago, urgently. The agency required proof of correspondence from the intended husband. So I forged it. I'm sorry." Elias sat back in his chair, stunned. You forged a letter from me? Woman, do you have any idea? Please." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I know what I did was wrong, but might I stay just one night? Just until I figure out where to go next? I can't." She broke off, her hand going unconsciously to the bruises on her face. "I can't go back. Please." The sensible thing would be to put her on the next stage, heading anywhere but here. Elias knew this. He'd built his life around avoiding complications, and this woman was nothing but trouble waiting to happen. But the way she sat there, trying so hard to hold herself together, reminded him of a wounded animal he'd once found in his barn, a fox with its leg caught in a trap, too exhausted to fight anymore, just waiting for the end. One night, he heard himself say, "You can stay at the ranch tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do." Relief washed over her face, quickly hidden. "Thank you. I promise I won't be any trouble." As Elias led her to where he'd left his horses, he had the sinking feeling that trouble had already found him, whether he'd invited it or not. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood and flame. Winter was coming, and he was bringing a stranger home. The morning sun crept over the eastern ridge, painting the frost-covered grass with threads of gold. Elias stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the woman emerge from his barn where she'd insisted on sleeping despite his offer of the cabin. Rosalie moved stiffly, her breath visible in the cold air as she wrapped the borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders. "There's coffee," he called out, his voice carrying across the still morning air. "And biscuits from yesterday." She approached the house with that same careful wariness he'd noticed in town, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. In the daylight, the bruises on her face looked worse, purple and green shadows that spoke of violence not long past. Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I'll be on my way after breakfast." "To where?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended. "Stage doesn't come back through Casper for 3 days." Her shoulders slumped slightly. I hadn't thought that far." Elias studied her over the rim of his mug. Despite everything, she'd taken care with her appearance, hair pinned up neatly, dress brushed clean of hay and dust. Pride, even in desperate circumstances. He recognized it because he'd seen it in his own mirror too many times. "Come inside and warm up. We'll figure something out." The cabin felt smaller with her in it. Elias found himself acutely aware of the bachelor's neglect, the stack of unwashed dishes, the clothes draped over chairs, the layer of dust on Clara's good furniture. Rosalie didn't comment, just accepted the coffee he poured and wrapped her hands around the mug as if trying to absorb every bit of warmth. "I can work," she said suddenly. "I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I can cook, clean, 10 chickens. I could help out for a few days. Earn my keep until I can get to another town." "I manage fine on my own," Elias said, then winced at how harsh it sounded. "Look, Miss Brennan, Mrs. Sullivan," she corrected quietly. "Or was. I'm not sure what I am now." "A widow, then." That explained some things, though not the bruises. Elias refilled his coffee, buying time to think. Outside, his cattle were lowing, reminding him of the work waiting. "I've got to ride out to check the herd. You can do whatever you think needs doing. There's food in the pantry." He left before she could respond, saddling his horse with movements made automatic by years of repetition. The familiar routine of working cattle, checking for injuries, moving them to fresh grazing, repairing a section of fence damaged by elk, helped clear his head. By noon, he'd almost convinced himself that having a stranger in his house was just a temporary inconvenience. That conviction lasted until he returned to find his cabin transformed. The floors had been scrubbed, the windows washed, every surface cleared of dust and grime. Something savory bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the scent of herbs he'd forgotten he owned. Rosalie stood at the table, her sleeves rolled up, kneading bread dough. She'd found Clara's apron somewhere and wore it tied around her waist. "I hope you don't mind," she said without looking up. The sourdough starter was still good, just needed feeding. Elias stared at the familiar blue apron, the one with tiny flowers embroidered along the hem. Clara had made it their first winter here, when the snow had trapped them inside for weeks. He'd packed it away with her other things, unable to bear the sight of it. Where did you find that? She paused in her kneading, finally meeting his eyes. The trunk in the corner. I was looking for clean dish towels. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry into personal things. Take it off. The words came out sharp and cold. Just take it off. Rosalie's hands went immediately to the apron strings, fumbling with them. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll put it back. The fear in her voice stopped him cold. She was backing away, the dough forgotten, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from experience. Elias forced himself to take a breath, to lower his voice. It's all right. You couldn't have known. That was my wife's. Understanding dawned on her face. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll wash it and put it back exactly where— No. He turned away, unable to look at Clara's apron on another woman. Keep it on for now. No sense letting good dough go to waste. The rest of the day passed in awkward silence. They moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the steps, careful not to touch, not to intrude. When evening came, Elias found himself sitting down to the best meal he'd had in years. Venison stew rich with vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Even a pie made from the dried apples he'd forgotten were in the pantry. This is real good, he admitted grudgingly. My mother taught me. Rosalie pushed food around her plate without eating much. She was in service to a wealthy family in Dublin before we came to America. Said a woman should always know how to keep a proper house. How long have you been widowed? She hesitated. 6 months. Though, if I'm honest, I lost him long before he died. There was a story there, but Elias didn't push. They finished the meal in silence, and he helped her clear the dishes, something he'd never done when Clara was alive. As Rosalie washed and he dried, he found himself studying the scars on her hands, small white lines that crossed her knuckles and disappeared beneath her sleeves. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both looked toward the window. Dark clouds were building over the mountains, promising one of the fierce autumn storms that could drop a foot of water in hours. Storm coming, Elias said unnecessarily. Rosalie's hands stilled in the dishwater. A bad one. Could be. These mountain storms can be fierce. She nodded, but he noticed how her shoulders tensed, how she glanced toward the door as if measuring the distance. When lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in stark white light, she flinched. You can sleep inside tonight, Elias said. Take the bed. I'll put my bedroll by the fire. I couldn't. That barn roof leaks something terrible in heavy rain. Unless you fancy sleeping in puddles. You'll take the offer? She accepted with clear reluctance, and they spent an awkward hour by the fire, Elias pretending to read his Bible while Rosalie mended a tear in her dress. The storm built steadily, wind rattling the windows, rain hammering on the roof like bullets. When a particularly violent crack of thunder shook the house, Rosalie gasped, the needle sliding from her fingers. Just noise, Elias said gently. We're safe as houses here. She bent to retrieve the needle, but her hands were shaking too badly to thread it again. I'm sorry. I don't usually— Storms didn't bother me before. Before what? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible over the storm. Before the night Thomas died, there was a storm then too. Elias set down his Bible. The firelight caught the tears on her cheeks, though she was trying hard not to let them fall. Without thinking, he moved to sit beside her on the bench, careful to leave space between them. Was Thomas your husband? A nod. He wasn't. He wasn't a good man, but he was my husband, and I tried to be a good wife. Then one night— She wrapped her arms around herself. There was so much thunder. I didn't hear them break in at first. By the time I did, it was too late. Them? His business partners. Thomas owed them money. They came to collect. Her voice was flat, emotionless. They killed him. Would have killed me too. But I stayed hidden in the root cellar until morning, listening to them tear the house apart looking for me. The pieces were falling into place now. The bruises, the fear, the desperate flight to a stranger half a continent away. These men, they're still after you. I saw their faces. She looked at him directly, and in her gray eyes he saw a resolve as hard as the mountains outside. I saw what they did. They can't let me live. Not if they want to stay free. Outside, the storm raged on, turning the small cabin into an island in a sea of wind and rain. Elias thought of his quiet life, his safe routines, the walls he'd built around his heart. Then he looked at this woman who'd survived horror he could barely imagine, who'd crossed half the country on a lie and a prayer, who jumped at thunder but still had the courage to run. "Well," he said finally, "I reckon you can stay until we figure out something better. Can't hardly send you out in this weather anyway." The gratitude in her eyes was almost painful to see. "I'll earn my keep. I promise. You won't regret this." As the storm battered the cabin and the fire burned low, Elias had the feeling he already did. But when Rosalie finally retreated to the bedroom and he spread his bedroll by the hearth, he couldn't deny that the house felt less empty than it had in years. Even the storm seemed less fierce with another human presence nearby, another heartbeat in the darkness. He lay awake long into the night, listening to the rain and thinking about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday he'd been alone, content in his solitude. Now there was a woman in Clara's bed, wearing Clara's apron, filling his house with the scent of bread and the sound of another voice. It wasn't right. It wasn't what he'd chosen. But as thunder rolled across the valley and lightning painted wild shadows on the walls, Elias found himself hoping the storm would last just a little longer, putting off the decisions that daylight would surely bring. The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Rosalie rose before dawn each day, starting the fire and putting coffee on before Elias was even awake. By the time he emerged from his bedroll by the hearth, she'd have breakfast waiting, nothing fancy, just biscuits and gravy or flapjacks, but hot and filling. She moved around his kitchen with quiet efficiency, learning where things were kept, making small improvements without asking permission. Elias found himself noticing things he'd grown blind to, the way morning light caught in her dark hair when she stood at the stove, how she hummed softly while she worked, Irish melodies he didn't recognize, but that made the cabin feel less hollow, the careful way she handled his dishes, as if understanding that even his everyday things carried memories. But it was the nights that revealed the depth of her wounds. More than once. Elias woke to the sound of her crying out in her sleep, trapped in nightmares she couldn't escape. The first time it happened, he'd rushed to the bedroom door, then frozen, unsure whether his presence would comfort or terrify. He'd stood there in the darkness, listening to her whimper like a wounded animal, until finally the sound subsided and he crept back to his bedroll. One afternoon, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Elias returned from checking his cattle to find Rosalie sitting by the window, watching the white flakes drift down. She'd been crying. He could tell by the redness around her eyes, but she smiled when she saw him. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I'd forgotten how quiet snow makes everything. Wait until January. You'll be sick of the quiet by then." He hung his coat by the door, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, then held up a letter. "The post rider came by. There was news from Chicago in the paper he left." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're still looking for me. They've offered a reward." Elias took the newspaper she offered, scanning the small notice. Information sought regarding the whereabouts of Mrs. Rosalie Sullivan, widow, late of Chicago. Substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. The wording was carefully neutral, but he could read between the lines. "Safe return," Rosalie said bitterly, "as if they care about my safety. How much time do you think we have?" She looked up at him, startled by the "we." "I don't know. They'll check the stage routes first, the big towns, a place like this." She gestured at the vast emptiness outside the window. "It might take them months to think of looking here. Then we have time to plan." Elias sat across from her, his mind already working through possibilities. "Come spring, maybe we can get you to California, or Oregon, somewhere far enough they won't follow. I don't have money for passage that far. We'll figure something out." She studied him with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Elias didn't have a good answer for that. He thought of Clara, how she'd taken in every stray cat and injured bird that crossed their path. A person needs help. You help them, that's all. That night, after supper, Rosalie surprised him by pulling out a small violin case from her belongings. "Do you mind?" she asked. "Music helps when I can't settle." "Go ahead." The first notes that flowed from the instrument were so pure, so achingly beautiful, that Elias felt his throat tighten. She played with her eyes closed, swaying slightly, lost in the melody. It was a sad tune, full of longing and loss, but somehow hopeful too. When she finished, the silence that followed felt sacred. That was... Elias had to clear his throat. "That was something. My father's violin. It's all I have left of home." She ran her fingers along the worn wood. "Thomas sold everything else, but I hid this, played in secret when he was gone. Play another." This time the tune was livelier, something that made him think of dancing and laughter. Without meaning to, Elias found himself telling her about the barn dances back in Missouri, how Clara could dance all night and still be fresh as a daisy come morning. Rosalie listened with a small smile, occasionally interjecting a note or two on the violin to underscore his stories. "She sounds wonderful," Rosalie said when he finally ran out of words. She was. Elias stared into the fire. "Probably would have liked you. She had a weakness for strays, too." The comparison should have stung, but Rosalie only laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. "A stray, I suppose that's what I am." As November deepened and the snow grew heavier, their careful dance of avoidance gradually eased. Elias still slept by the fire. Rosalie still jumped at unexpected sounds, but there were moments of surprising ease. She taught him to play chess with a set she'd carved from pieces of firewood. He showed her how to read the weather and the movement of clouds and the behavior of his cattle. One evening, a blizzard trapped them inside for 2 days straight. Cabin fever set in quickly. The walls seemed to shrink. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. By the second night, they were snapping at each other over trivial things. When Rosalie accidentally knocked over his coffee mug, shattering it on the floor, she burst into tears. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. "I'll fix it. I can—" "Stop." Elias knelt beside her, gently taking her hands to still them. "It's just a cup." "No, it's not." She looked at him with desperate eyes. "It was yours, part of your life here, and I broke it like I break everything. Rosalie." He said her name firmly, grounding her. "It's just a cup. You're bleeding." She looked down at her palm, where a shard had cut deep. Elias fetched clean cloth and the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. As he cleaned and wrapped the wound, he was acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of her skin, the way her breath hitched when the alcohol stung. "There," he said, tying off the bandage, but he didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't pull away. They knelt there on the floor, surrounded by broken pottery, hands clasped, neither speaking. Finally, Rosalie broke the silence. "Sometimes I dream he's still alive. Thomas, I wake up expecting to see him standing over me, fist raised." She laughed bitterly. "Then I remember he's dead, and I'm not sure if I'm relieved or terrified. At least when he was alive. I knew what monster I was facing." Elias turned her palm over, tracing the edge of the bandage with his thumb. "You're safe here." "Am I?" She met his eyes, and he saw a different kind of fear there now. "Sometimes the way you look at me, like you're seeing someone else. I can't be her. Elias, I can't be Clara." "I'm not asking you to be." "Aren't you?" He didn't have an answer for that. Couldn't deny that sometimes, in certain light, When she stood at the stove or hummed while folding laundry, he forgot. Forgot she wasn't Clara, forgot the years of loneliness, forgot the walls he'd built. Those moments of forgetting terrified him more than any blizzard. "I should check the animals," he said, releasing her hand and standing abruptly. "Elias, the storm." But he was already pulling on his coat, needing the blast of cold air, the sting of snow on his face, anything to clear the warmth of her touch from his mind. He fought through the wind to the barn, where his horses nickered nervously. He stayed there longer than necessary, brushing down animals that didn't need it, checking tack that was already secure. When he finally returned to the cabin, Rosalie had cleaned up the broken mug and retreated to the bedroom. Her violin case sat by the door, and he had the sudden fear that she might leave, might vanish into the storm rather than stay where she wasn't truly wanted. He knocked on the bedroom door. "Rosalie?" "What?" Her voice was muffled, thick with tears. "Play something, please." There was a long pause, then footsteps. She emerged with her violin, eyes red but determined. Without a word, she began to play, not the sad melodies of before, but something fierce and wild, like the storm outside. The music seemed to pull emotions from deep within him, grief and loneliness, but also something else, hope, maybe, or just the dangerous warmth of no longer being alone. When she finished, they stood facing each other in the flickering firelight. The storm howled outside, but inside there was only the crackle of flames and their measured breathing. "I'm not her," Rosalie said again, quietly. "I know." Elias took a step closer, drawn by something stronger than wisdom. "But you're here. You're real. And that's something I haven't let myself want in a long time." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I can't be what you need me to be. I'm broken. Elias, those men didn't just take my husband. They took pieces of me I don't know how to get back. Maybe we're both broken." He was close enough now to see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, to catch the faint scent of the lavender soap she used. "Maybe that's why you ended up on my doorstep." The wind shook the cabin, reminding them both of the wilderness pressing in on all sides. But in that moment, the space between them seemed vast and terrifying in its own way. Elias raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull back, and touched the scar that ran along her jaw, a thin white line he'd noticed but never asked about. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, just slightly, like a wild animal accepting comfort. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." The morning after the blizzard dawned crystal clear. The world transformed into glittering white. Elias woke to find frost painting intricate patterns on the windows and no smell of coffee brewing. The kitchen was cold, the stove unlit. Rosalie's bedroom door stood open, the room empty. Panic seized him. He yanked on his boots and coat, bursting out onto the porch. Her footprints led to the barn, small and deliberate in the fresh snow. He followed them, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, telling himself she'd just gone to check on something, that she hadn't fled in the night like he'd feared. He found her in the barn, fully dressed in her traveling clothes, her carpet bag packed and sitting in the hay beside her. She was saddling his gentlest mare with clumsy, unpracticed movements. "Going somewhere?" He kept his voice carefully neutral. She didn't turn around. "I think it's best if I leave. The storm's passed. The roads should be clear enough." "And go where? Exactly. It's 20 miles to the nearest town, and you don't know the way." "I'll figure it out." Her hands fumbled with the cinch, unable to get it tight enough. "I've caused you enough trouble." Elias moved closer, noting how she tensed at his approach. "This about last night?" "Last night was a mistake." She finally faced him, her gray eyes bright with unshed tears. I won't be some substitute for your dead wife, and you can't be my escape from fear. It's not fair to either of us." The words stung because they held truth. Elias took the saddle from her hands, setting it back on its stand. "You're right, but that doesn't mean you need to run off and freeze to death in a snowdrift. I'm not your responsibility. No, you're not." He met her gaze steadily. "But you're here, and I offered you shelter. My word means something, even if everything else is complicated. She searched his face, looking for something. He wasn't sure what. Finally, her shoulders slumped. I can't keep taking from you. Room, board, protection. I need to pay my own way. Then stay until spring. Help with the ranch work. We'll call it even. And then you go wherever you want. California, Oregon, hell, even Canada if that suits you. But not today. Not like this. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. They walked back to the house in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots. Once inside, Elias built up the fire while Rosalie unpacked her bag. Neither spoke of the night before, of hands touching and words spoken in the storm's wild darkness. Instead, they moved around each other with renewed caution, rebuilding the walls that had briefly crumbled. Over the following days, they established new boundaries. Elias made a point of spending more time outside, even when the weather was brutal. Rosalie threw herself into household tasks with desperate energy, scrubbing things that were already clean, reorganizing cupboards that didn't need it. They spoke only of practical matters, the need for more firewood, the dwindling flour supply, the cow that seemed to be favoring her left front leg. But the careful distance couldn't erase what had passed between them. Elias caught himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, noticing the way she bit her lip when concentrating on mending, how she absently rubbed her scarred hands when worried. And sometimes he'd glance up to find her studying him with an expression he couldn't read, only to have her quickly look away. One evening, as December settled in with bitter cold, Elias returned from town with supplies and mail. Among the letters was another newspaper, which he hesitated before showing her. The reward for information about Rosalie Sullivan had doubled, and now included a description that, while vague, was accurate enough to be worrying. Rosalie read it without expression, then carefully folded the paper. They're getting desperate. That's good, in a way. Desperate men make mistakes, or they get more dangerous. She smiled grimly. They've always been dangerous. Now they're just advertising it. That night, unable to sleep, Elias heard her moving around the kitchen. He found her sitting at the table with a cup of tea, writing by candlelight. Let her home, he asked, though he knew she had no home to write to. Making a list. She showed him the paper, supplies they'd need for winter, repairs to be made, tasks organized by urgency. If I'm staying until spring, I want to be useful. He sat across from her, noting the determined set of her jaw. You don't need to prove anything, you know. Don't I? She set down her pen. Every day I stay here, I put you at risk. Those men, if they find me here, let me worry about that. Like Clara let you worry about everything. The words slipped out sharp and sudden. She immediately pressed her hand to her mouth. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. Elias felt the old grief rise, but also something else. A strange relief at hearing Clara's name spoken aloud, even in anger. What do you know about it? I know you blame yourself for something. The way you look at her things, touch them like they're holy relics. The way you punish yourself with loneliness. She met his eyes. I know because I do the same thing. Wonder if I could have changed things, been better, fought harder. Clara fell from her horse. Elias said quietly. Storm spooked it. She was riding to town to get medicine for a sick neighbor, even though I told her to wait for better weather. Stubborn woman never did listen when someone needed help. He smiled sadly. By the time I found her, there was nothing to be done. She lived 3 more days. Longest 3 days of my life. Rosalie reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but leaving hers close enough that he could take it if he chose. And you've been alone ever since. Seemed easier that way. Less to lose, but less to live for, too. They sat in the candlelight, hands almost touching, both carrying ghosts they couldn't set down. Finally. Elias pulled back. It's late. Morning comes early. But he paused at the doorway. Rosalie, that list of yours? At teaching me some of those Irish tunes on your fiddle. Been too quiet around here anyway. Her smile was worth the admission of loneliness. I'd like that. As the days shortened and winter tightened its grip, they found a new rhythm. Evenings often included music now, Rosalie playing while Elias attempted to follow along on an old harmonica he dug out of storage. She taught him Irish reels that made his feet itch to dance, and he shared the mountain ballads his grandfather had sung. Sometimes they'd just sit by the fire, her playing softly while he read aloud from books that had gathered dust for years. One night, after a particularly lively tune, Rosalie laughed at his clumsy attempt to keep rhythm. It was a full, genuine laugh that transformed her face, and Elias realized with a start that he'd never seen her truly smile before. Not like this, with joy instead of politeness or bitter irony. "You're terrible at this," she said, eyes bright with mirth. "Well, not all of us had fancy music teachers." "Fancy?" She laughed again. "My father was a dock worker who played fiddle in pubs for drinking money. He taught me between shifts, when his hands weren't too tired from loading ships." "Tell me about him." So she did, sharing stories of growing up poor but proud in Chicago's Irish neighborhoods. How her mother took in washing, how her younger brothers died of fever one terrible winter, how her father's music was the only thing that kept their spirits up during the worst times. She talked until the fire burned low, painting pictures of a life Elias had never known. Crowded tenements, factory whistles, the smell of the stockyards when the wind was wrong. "How'd you end up with Thomas Sullivan?" Elias asked carefully. Her expression closed slightly. "He had a shop near where Mother worked. Seemed respectable, stable. After my parents died, I was alone, working in a factory that paid barely enough to survive. Thomas offered a way out." She stared into the dying flames. "I mistook ownership for love. By the time I realized the difference, it was too late." Elias fed another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral up the chimney. "We all make choices that trap us, one way or another. Some traps are worse than others." She touched her throat unconsciously, and he could see the shadow of old bruises in the gesture. "At least you chose your isolation. I had mine chosen for me. Until now." She looked at him sharply. "Until now." She agreed quietly. "Though I'm not sure running from one man's house to another's counts as freedom. You're free to leave whenever you choose. I told you that." "I know." She stood, wrapping her shawl tighter. "That's what makes it different. Good night, Elias." As her bedroom door closed, Elias remained by the fire, pondering the strange turns his life had taken. 2 months ago, he'd been content in his solitude. Now he couldn't imagine the cabin without her presence, the soft sounds of her moving about, the scent of her soup simmering on the stove, the sight of her mending by lamplight. It terrified him, this slow weaving of another person into the fabric of his days, but not as much as the thought of spring coming and taking her away. The thaw came early that year, turning the roads to mud by late February. Elias watched from the porch as the last of the snow melted from the lower pastures, exposing the brown grass beneath. Each day of warming weather felt like a countdown, though neither he nor Rosalie spoke of what the spring would bring. The morning he decided to take her to town for supplies, Elias found her standing at the window, a letter clutched in her hand. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the paper. "What is it?" He crossed to her in 3 strides. She handed him the letter wordlessly. It had arrived with yesterday's post, addressed to Mrs. E. Monroe, a fiction they'd maintained for appearances when dealing with the townspeople. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message brief. "Your husband's former business associates wish to discuss certain outstanding matters. They are most eager to make your acquaintance and resolve any misunderstandings. They will arrive within the month to collect what is owed." "How?" Rosalie's voice was barely above a whisper. "How did they find me?" Elias studied the postmark, Denver, not Chicago. They were getting closer. "Could be they're checking all the territorial marriage records, looking for recent entries. We've been buying supplies as Mr. and Mrs. Monroe for months now." "I've put you in danger. I should leave tonight." "You'll do no such thing." He crumpled the letter and tossed it into the stove. Running now would just confirm their suspicions. Besides, a month gives us time to prepare. Prepare for what? You don't know these men, what they're capable of. I know they haven't met Wyoming justice yet." His voice was hard. "This is my land, my home. I'll be damned if I let some Chicago thugs run me off it." Rosalie sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "You don't understand. Thomas owed them money, yes, but that's not why they're hunting me. I saw them kill him. Watched from the landing as they beat him to death in our parlor. They know I can identify them, testify if they're ever caught. Then we'll get you somewhere safe. The territorial marshal." "No." She looked up at him with hollow eyes. "Don't you see? They have money, connections. There's nowhere safe, not as long as I'm alive to bear witness." Elias knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "Listen to me. I've lived in these mountains for 15 years. I know every trail, every hiding place. If they come here, they'll find more than they bargained for. I can't let you risk. It's not your choice to make." He squeezed her hands gently. "Now, we're still going to town. We'll act normal, pick up supplies, let people see us, but we'll also send some telegrams, make some preparations. I've got friends who owe me favors." The ride to town was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for unfamiliar riders. But the muddy streets of Casper held only the usual collection of ranchers, merchants, and drifters. At the general store, Mrs. Holbrook greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Monroe, so good to see you. That remedy you suggested for my Arthur's cough worked wonders." Rosalie managed to smile. "I'm glad to hear it, just something my mother used to make." As the women chatted about domestic matters, Elias slipped out to the telegraph office. He sent 3 messages, one to an old Army friend who'd become a federal marshal, one to a cattle association that dealt harshly with those who threatened their members, and one to a Pinkerton agent he'd once helped track rustlers. Then he stopped by the sheriff's office. Sheriff Garrett was a cautious man who'd survived 20 years of law enforcement by knowing when to act and when to wait. He listened to Elias's carefully edited version of events without interruption. "So your wife witnessed a murder back east, and now the killers are coming here?" The sheriff's weathered face gave nothing away. "That's about the size of it. And you're sure they're heading this way?" Elias showed him the letter. Garrett studied it, then handed it back. "Could be a bluff. Could be they're fishing, sending letters all over, hoping to spook her into running. Maybe, but I'd rather be ready either way." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye out for strangers asking questions. You might want to ride out to the Double Bar and talk to Jim Martinez. He's got a crew that doesn't take kindly to outsiders threatening local folks." By the time Elias collected Rosalie from the store, word had already begun to spread. Mrs. Holbrook's parting words made that clear. "You take care now, dear, and don't you worry. This town looks after its own." On the ride home, Rosalie was quiet, finally, as they approached the ranch. She said, "You told them some of it, enough to get them watching. They could be in danger too, if these people have faced Indian raids, outlaws, claim jumpers, and range wars. A couple of city criminals don't scare them much." He helped her down from the wagon. "This isn't Chicago. Rosalie, out here, we protect what's ours." That evening, as they prepared supper together, the domestic routine felt different, charged with the awareness that it might not last. When their hands brushed passing a plate, they both froze. When Rosalie reached around him for the salt, he caught her wrist gently. "I'm scared," she admitted, not pulling away. "I know." He turned to face her fully, still holding her wrist. But not just of them anymore. She understood. He could see it in her eyes. The fear wasn't only about the men hunting her, it was about this thing growing between them, made more urgent by the threat of its ending. "Elias," she started, then stopped, uncertain. He raised his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek. This time she didn't flinch, instead leaning into his touch with a soft sigh. "Whatever happens," he said roughly, "I'm glad you came here. Glad that damn letter brought you to my door." "Even with all the trouble?" "Especially with all the trouble. I was dying here. Rosalie, just too stubborn to admit it. She raised up on her toes, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might bolt. Then her arms came around his neck and his hands tangled in her hair, and gentleness gave way to months of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie rested her forehead against his chest. "This is madness. We barely know each other." "I know enough." He tilted her chin up. "I know you're brave and stubborn and kind. I know you make the best biscuits I've ever tasted. I know you play the fiddle like an angel and laugh like music. I know I don't want to lose you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not good." "You survived. That's all that matters." She kissed him again, fierce and desperate, and he understood this too was a kind of survival. They clung to each other in the lamp-lit kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary implements of daily life, while somewhere beyond the mountains, danger drew closer. Later, as they sat by the fire, closer now, her head on his shoulder, Rosalie asked, "What did your army friend say? In response to the telegram?" "Haven't heard back yet. Could take days." He stroked her hair absently. "But Tom McClure's a good man. If anyone can dig up information on these men, find out who they really are, it's him. And if they arrive before we hear back, then we handle it ourselves." He felt her shiver and pulled her closer. "I've been alone a long time, Rosalie. But I wasn't always. I've fought Indians and rustlers, survived blizzards and droughts. I won't let anyone." She placed a finger over his lips. "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Just hold me for now. Let me pretend we're just two ordinary people with ordinary problems." So he held her as the fire died to embers, both of them silent, listening to the wind pick up outside. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled, a sound that had once seemed lonely but now felt more like a warning, the pack protecting its territory, ready to fight any who threatened what was theirs. When Rosalie finally rose to go to bed, she paused at the bedroom door. "Elias, whatever happens, I want you to know, these months with you, they've been the closest thing to happy I've felt in years." Before he could respond, she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. He sat alone for a long time after, making plans and discarding them, trying to prepare for a confrontation he couldn't fully imagine. But one thing was certain, he'd found something worth fighting for again. And this time, he wouldn't fail to protect it. The night pressed against the windows, full of shadow and possibility. Somewhere out there, men were coming to reclaim what they thought was theirs, but they would find more than a frightened woman alone. They would find she had become part of something larger, a home, a community, a man who'd forgotten how to live until she'd shown him the way back. Let them come, Elias thought grimly. Let them come and learn what it meant to threaten a Wyoming rancher's family, because that's what she was now, whether she wore his ring or not. Family, his to protect, his to defend, his to love, if they survived what was coming. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the hillsides with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, columbine, and prairie roses that seemed to mock the darkness gathering on the horizon. Elias worked to prepare the ranch, setting up watch positions and checking his ammunition supplies. But the waiting wore on them both. Rosalie had taken to carrying Clara's old derringer in her apron pocket, her hand going to it whenever a horse appeared on the ridge. 3 weeks after the letter arrived, Tom McClure's telegram finally came. "Men you described are James Dalton and Frank Carver. Wanted in 3 states. Federal marshals interested but need witness. Can arrange protection if she testifies. Wire response urgent." Elias found Rosalie in the garden she'd started, kneeling among the newly planted rows of vegetables. The sight of her there, dirt on her hands and sun on her face, looking like she belonged, made his chest tight. "Tom wrote back," he said, handing her the telegram. She read it twice, then sat back on her heels. "Testify. In a courtroom. Face them again." Her voice was flat. "With federal protection. It's a chance to be free of this. Properly free." or a chance to die properly public. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. You don't know these men like I do. They have reach, money to buy guards, judges, anyone. Maybe, but running forever isn't living either. That night, they made love for the first time, coming together with desperate tenderness in the bed that had once been Clara's. Afterwards, Rosalie traced the scars on his chest, old wounds from battles fought long ago. So many fights, she murmured. Don't you ever get tired of it? Got tired of everything for a while there. He caught her hand, kissing her fingertips. Then you showed up. I should feel guilty, she said quietly. Being here, in her bed, wearing her clothes. But I don't. Is that terrible? Clara wouldn't want guilt. She'd want life to go on. He pulled her closer. Took me too long to understand that. They lay entwined as moonlight painted silver squares on the floor. Outside, a screech owl called, and Rosalie shivered despite the warmth. They're coming, she said. I can feel it. Let them come. His arms tightened around her. This is our place now. Ours. She turned in his arms, kissing him with fierce possessiveness. Promise me something. If things go bad, you'll save yourself. Don't die for my mistakes. Rosalie, promise me. He was silent, knowing it was a lie, even as he spoke. I promise. 2 days later, riders appeared on the horizon. Elias spotted them from the barn, 3 men picking their way down the trail that led from the main road. Even at a distance, he could tell they weren't locals. Their horses were too fine, their clothes too clean, their posture too stiff for men used to ranch country. He walked calmly to the house, finding Rosalie rolling out pie crust in the kitchen. Company coming, 3 men, about 20 minutes out. Her hand stilled on the rolling pin, knuckles going white. Then she nodded, untying her apron with steady fingers. Where do you want me? Bedroom. Windows boarded up except for the rifle slot. You remember what I taught you? Squeeze, don't jerk. Aim for center mass. Keep shooting until they stop moving. She recited the lessons like a prayer. He caught her as she passed, pulling her close for a hard kiss. It's going to be all right. Liar. But she smiled as she said it. Brave and beautiful, and his. Don't get yourself killed. Elias Monroe. We have plans for that garden. She disappeared into the bedroom with Clara's Winchester, and Elias checked his own weapons, the Colt on his hip, the shotgun by the door, the Henry rifle leaning against the porch rail. Then he sat in his rocking chair and waited, for all the world like a man enjoying a spring morning. The riders stopped at the gate, taking their time to study the layout. Finally, 2 dismounted while the 3rd stayed back, hand resting on his sidearm. The 2 on foot were opposites, one tall and thin with the pallor of a man who lived indoors, the other broad and scarred with hands that had dealt out plenty of violence. Morning, gentlemen, Elias called out pleasantly. Something I can help you with? The thin one, Dalton, most likely, smiled without warmth. Good morning. We're looking for a woman, Mrs. Rosalie Sullivan. We have reason to believe she might be in these parts. No one here by that name. Elias kept rocking. Nice and easy. Just me and my wife. Your wife? Dalton's smile widened. Recent marriage. We understand. Congratulations. Perhaps we could meet the lucky lady. She's feeling poorly today. Female troubles. You understand. The scarred one, Carver, shifted impatiently. Look, farmer, we know she's here. Make this easy on yourself. We just want to talk to her about some property that belongs to our employer. Her late husband had some items that weren't his to leave. Like I said, no one here by that name. Dalton sighed theatrically. Mr. Monroe. It is Monroe, isn't it? You seem like a reasonable man, a man who's built something good here. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Fires start so easily in dry weather. Elias stopped rocking. Are you threatening me, Mr.? Simply observing. These are dangerous times. All sorts of accidents can happen to a man living alone so far from town. Good thing I'm not alone then. Elias stood slowly, his hands settling naturally near his Colt, And good thing the sheriff knows you're in the area. Sent word when you passed through Casper yesterday." Carver's hand moved toward his gun, but Dalton stopped him with a gesture. "No need for unpleasantness. We're businessmen, Mr. Monroe. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. The woman has something we need. Her testimony regarding certain events in Chicago. We're prepared to pay well for her cooperation." "Testimony?" Elias laughed coldly. "That what you're calling murder these days?" The mask finally slipped from Dalton's face. "I see she's told you her version of events. The delusions of a hysterical woman who killed her own husband and fled. We're here to bring her back to face justice." "Justice?" Elias spat to the side. "I know what your kind of justice looks like. Now get off my land." "I'm afraid we can't do that." Dalton nodded to Carver, who started forward. The shot came from the bedroom window, kicking up dust at Carver's feet. He froze as Rosalie's voice carried clear and strong. "The next one won't miss. Ah, Mrs. Sullivan." Dalton raised his voice. "How nice to hear your voice again. Though I must say, you look different. The mountain air must agree with you." "Leave now," Rosalie called out, "or I'll give you the same justice you gave Thomas." The third man finally dismounted, younger than the others with the cold eyes of a natural killer. He studied the house, calculating angles and cover. "2 guns at most," he said quietly. "We can take them." "Perhaps." Dalton never took his eyes off Elias. "But at what cost? And who would we lose in the taking?" He smiled that cold smile again. "No, I think we'll accept your hospitality for now. Mr. Monroe, we'll make camp just outside your property line, public land, perfectly legal, and we'll wait a day, a week, a month, however long it takes. You can't watch every angle forever, and when you make a mistake, when you let your guard down for just a moment," he shrugged eloquently. "Get out." Elias drew his Colt in one smooth motion. "Now." They retreated without hurry, Dalton tipping his hat mockingly. As they reached their horses, he called back, "Give our regards to your charming wife, Mr. Monroe. Tell her we'll be seeing her soon." Elias waited until they were out of sight before going inside. He found Rosalie still at the window, the rifle barrel shaking in her hands. Gently, he took the weapon and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "You did good," he murmured into her hair. "Real good. They won't give up." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "They'll wait us out, wear us down." "Maybe, or maybe help will come first." He tilted her face up. "Either way, we're not alone. Jim Martinez and his boys are already watching the roads. Sheriff Garrett's deputized half the valley. These bastards think they're dealing with one frightened woman. They're about to learn different." That night, they could see the glow of a campfire on the ridge, the killers making good on their threat. Elias and Rosalie took turns keeping watch, catching what sleep they could. Near dawn, riders approached from the south, and Elias nearly shot Jim Martinez before recognizing the rancher's distinctive silhouette. "Heard you had some unwanted guests," Martinez said quietly. "Thought you might like some company." 6 men had come with him, all armed, all with the weathered look of men who'd fought their share of battles. They took up positions around the ranch without being asked, melting into the landscape like they'd always been there. As the sun rose, Dalton and his men would see that the Monroe Ranch was no longer isolated, no longer an easy target. The siege had begun, but now both sides were dug in, waiting for the other to make the first real move. Rosalie stood beside Elias on the porch, watching the light creep across the valley. "They came," she said wonderingly. "Your neighbors, they actually came. Told you, this isn't Chicago. Out here, we take care of our own." He wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "And you're one of us now, like it or not." She leaned into him, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "I like it," she admitted. "I like it very much." The campfire on the ridge flickered and died as the day began. But everyone knew the watchers were still there. The real fight was yet to come. But for now, in this moment, Elias and Rosalie stood together on their land, surrounded by friends, facing whatever came next as one. The standoff stretched into its third day when Dalton made his move, not with guns, but with paper. A wanted poster that the youngest killer nailed to the gatepost at dawn before retreating to their camp. Elias retrieved it, jaw tight as he read the formal language declaring Rosalie Sullivan wanted for the murder of her husband, with a reward large enough to tempt even honest men. "Clever bastards," Jim Martinez muttered, reading over Elias's shoulder. "They're trying to turn the law against us." By noon, Sheriff Garrett himself rode out to the ranch, his face grave. "Elias, we need to talk." They gathered in the kitchen. Elias, Rosalie, the sheriff, and Martinez. Garrett spread the wanted poster on the table, alongside a telegraph from Chicago. "This came through official channels, judge's signature, city seal, everything proper. Far as the law's concerned, Mrs. Sullivan is a fugitive." "You know that's not true," Rosalie said quietly. "I told you what really happened. I believe you, ma'am, but belief and legal proof are different animals." Garrett rubbed his weathered face. "Those men out there, they're bounty hunters now, acting within the law. I can't run them off for doing what's technically legal." "Like hell," Martinez growled. "Legal don't make it right." "No, it doesn't." Garrett met Elias's eyes. "But it means if shooting starts, you could be charged with interfering with a lawful arrest. Unless... Unless what? Unless she's not Rosalie Sullivan anymore." The sheriff pulled out another paper. "Marriage certificate, dated 3 months back. Says here you married Rosalie Brennan, recently of Chicago. Now, if that woman happened to be your legal wife, and these men are hunting someone named Sullivan..." Elias understood immediately. "Our marriage isn't legal. I never sent for her. Never. I got a minister says different. Old Tom Brewster may be half blind and drunk most days, but he keeps good records. Says he married you two proper last December. Even got witnesses, Jim here and Mrs. Holbrook both signed." Martinez grinned. "I remember that wedding clear as day. Beautiful ceremony." Rosalie looked between them, hope and disbelief warring on her face. "But that's fraud. Making false documents. Protecting an innocent woman from murderers is what it is," Garrett said firmly. "Now, I can't make those men leave, but I can make sure they know Mrs. Elias Monroe has the full protection of the law. Any move against her is a move against a citizen of Wyoming territory." That afternoon, when Garrett delivered this news to Dalton's camp, Elias watched from the porch. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw Dalton's controlled fury. Carver's clenched fists, the younger man's hand hovering near his gun. The sheriff rode away unharmed, but the tension ratcheted higher. "They'll try something now," Rosalie said. "Legal protection won't stop them. Just make them desperate." She was right. That night, despite the guards, someone managed to set fire to the hay barn. By the time they formed a bucket brigade, half the winter feed was gone. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. They could be reached. "Let me go to them," Rosalie said as they watched the last embers die. "This is destroying everything you've built. Our barn, our hay, our fight." Elias pulled her against him, smelling smoke in her hair. "Don't you dare think about sacrificing yourself." The next morning brought a new problem. 2 of Martinez's men hadn't returned from their night watch. They found them tied up in a ravine, alive but badly beaten, their guns and horses taken. Carver's work, by the look of the methodical bruising. "They're picking us apart," one of the remaining guards said nervously. Maybe you should remember what you're fighting for." Martinez cut him off. "Any man wants to leave. Go ahead. But don't come back to the double bar looking for work." No one left, but Elias could see the strain. These men had families, responsibilities beyond this fight. He couldn't ask them to die for strangers. That evening, as Rosalie tended the injured men, a new rider approached under a white flag. Not one of Dalton's crew, but a well-dressed man with a look of money and authority. He introduced himself as Hamilton Pierce, attorney at law from Denver. "I represent certain interests in Chicago," Pierce said smoothly. Interest that would prefer this matter resolved without further violence. I'm authorized to make an offer. They listened in stony silence as he laid out terms. Rosalie would return to Chicago voluntarily, not as a prisoner, but as a protected witness. She would testify that her husband's death was a robbery gone wrong, that she'd fled in grief-stricken confusion. In exchange, all charges would be dropped, and she'd receive a generous settlement. Enough to start fresh anywhere. Pierce continued. California, Europe, wherever you choose. All we ask is that certain misunderstandings about my client's business dealings be forgotten. Your clients, Rosalie said coldly. You mean the men who beat my husband to death while I watched? Pierce's expression didn't change. I mean businessmen who've been slandered by the confused memories of a traumatized woman. This offer won't remain open long. After he left, they debated fiercely. Some thought she should take it, money and freedom, even if bought with lies. Others wanted to ford up and wait for the federal marshals Tom McClure had promised. What do you think? Rosalie asked Elias when they were alone. I think they're scared. This lawyer, this offer, they wouldn't bother if they thought they could just take you. He studied her face in the lamplight. But it's your choice, your life they're bargaining for. She was quiet for a long moment, then moved to where Clara's violin case sat in the corner. She'd taken to playing it in the evenings, finding comfort in music amid chaos. You know what I was thinking today? While I watched that barn burn, I was thinking about my father, how he always said the only thing they couldn't take from us was our truth. Truth's cold comfort sometimes. Maybe, but lies are colder. She drew the bow across the strings, coaxing out a melody that was both mournful and defiant. I won't let them buy my silence, not for all the money in California. That night, the attacks intensified, shots fired from the darkness, keeping everyone awake and on edge. One caught a guard in the shoulder, not fatal, but enough to send another man home to heal. By dawn, their defenders had dwindled to 4 exhausted men. Then, as the sun crested the mountains, new riders appeared, not from the camp on the ridge, but from the East Road. A dozen men in the distinctive blue uniforms of federal marshals, led by a grizzled veteran who introduced himself as Chief Marshal William Harding. Heard you folks were having some trouble, Harding said, eyeing the armed camp with professional interest. Tom McClure sends his regards. Mr. Monroe says to tell you the cavalry's here. The relief on Rosalie's face nearly broke Elias's heart. They'd survived the siege, but he knew the hardest part was still to come. Testifying meant reliving the worst night of her life, facing the men who'd haunted her dreams. We have warrants, Harding continued, for James Dalton and Frank Carver, multiple counts of murder, extortion, and conspiracy, with misses. Monroe's testimony, we can finally put them away. From the ridge, they could see movement in the enemy camp. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. Elias watched Dalton through field glasses, saw him giving quick orders, saw men starting to pack. They're going to run, Martinez said. No, Harding smiled grimly. They're going to try. What followed was swift and decisive. The marshals moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the camp before Dalton's men could scatter. There was a brief exchange of gunfire, Carver making a desperate last stand before it was over. 2 dead on their side, including the young killer who'd drawn too fast on men who'd been doing this for decades. They brought Dalton down in chains, his fine clothes dusty and torn, his composure finally shattered. As the marshals loaded him into a prison wagon, he looked directly at Rosalie. You think you've won, he called out, but you'll always be looking over your shoulder. Always wondering when we'll come back. Rosalie stepped forward, Elias beside her. No, she said clearly. I'll be living my life with my husband, on our land, free of you forever. That's the difference between us. You're going to a cage, and I'm already home. Dalton had no answer to that. The wagon rolled away, taking with it months of fear and running and looking over shoulders. Some of the ranch hands cheered. But Rosalie simply turned and buried her face against Elias's chest, shoulders shaking with released tension. "It's over," he murmured. "It's really over." "Not quite." Marshal Harding approached respectfully. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come to Denver to give your statement. Formal testimony before a judge. Might take a few weeks to arrange the trial." "We'll be there." Elias answered for both of them. "Whatever it takes to see this finished right." As the marshals departed with their prisoners, the ranch slowly returned to normal. Martinez and his men headed home, exhausted but victorious. Sheriff Garrett promised to keep deputies in the area until the trial was done. Soon it was just Elias and Rosalie again, standing amid the wreckage of their barn, the acrid smell of old smoke still hanging in the air. "We'll rebuild," Elias said. "Make it better than before." "We will." Rosalie took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But first, I think we should make this marriage certificate real. Proper wedding, with a sober minister and a dress that isn't blood-stained." He kissed her there in the ruins, tasting promise on her lips. Around them, the ranch sprawled under the vast Wyoming sky, scarred but unbroken, like the woman in his arms. They'd fought for this place, bled for it, and now it was truly theirs. The real wedding could wait for Denver, after the trial that would finally free Rosalie from her past. But standing there, Elias knew they were already bound by something stronger than any legal document: survival, trust, and a love forged in the crucible of shared danger. They'd won more than just their lives. They'd won the right to a future together, here in this harsh and beautiful land that had become their sanctuary. And that, Elias thought as he held his brave, battered, beautiful woman, was worth every bullet fired and every sleepless night. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces and glinting off the wedding ring he'd bought in town, but hadn't yet had the chance to give her. Soon enough for that. They had all the time in the world now. All the time in the world. The small church in Casper had never looked finer. Mrs. Holbrook and the other townswomen had transformed it with wildflowers and white ribbons, turning the humble wooden structure into something from a fairy tale. It was June now, 3 months after the trial that had seen Dalton and Carver sentenced to hang for their crimes. Rosalie stood in the back room, wearing a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk that the ladies had helped her order from Denver. "You look beautiful, dear Mrs." Holbrook said, adjusting Rosalie's veil, like a proper bride should. Through the window, Rosalie could see guests gathering, ranchers and their families, townspeople who'd come to accept her as one of their own, even some of the federal marshals who'd stayed in touch after the trial. But her eyes searched for only one face. She found him standing at the altar, looking uncomfortable in his new suit, but handsome as the day she'd first seen him on that stage platform. Jim Martinez stood beside him as best man, grinning broadly. When their eyes met across the crowded church, Elias smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Old Tom Brewster, sober for once and delighted to perform a real wedding after his fictional one, spoke about love forged in hardship and the courage to trust again. When he asked for the rings, a small girl from town, one Rosalie had been teaching to play violin, came forward with them on a silk pillow. "With this ring," Elias said, his voice strong and sure, "I take you as my wife, in truth this time, for all our days to come." Rosalie's hand trembled slightly as she slipped the band on his finger. "With this ring, I choose you as my husband, my partner, my home." When Tom pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared was tender and fierce and full of promise. The congregation erupted in cheers, and someone, probably one of Martinez's men, fired a celebratory shot into the air that made everyone laugh. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up under the big cottonwood trees that were full summer green. The new barn, rebuilt bigger and better than before, served as a dance floor. Rosalie played her violin while others danced, Irish reels mixing with cowboy stomps until the distinctions didn't matter anymore. As evening fell, she found herself standing where she'd first arrived, that scared woman with bruises and secrets. So much had changed. The garden she'd planted was thriving. Neat rows of vegetables promising good eating come fall. The house had new curtains at the windows, a woman's touch everywhere but still honoring what had come before. Clara's photograph sat on the mantel, and sometimes Rosalie left wildflowers beneath it, one woman honoring another. "No regrets?" Elias asked, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "None," she said, leaning back against him. "Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd chosen a different name from that agency list." "You'd have found your way here anyway," he said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Sheriff Garrett approached them, hat in hand. "Sorry to interrupt the festivities, but thought you should know. Got word from Denver. They found more of Dalton's operation, arrested a dozen men. Your testimony broke it wide open. Mrs. Monroe, there's a lot of folks sleeping safer because of your courage." After he left, Rosalie was quiet. The past would always be with her. Elias knew. There would still be nights when thunderstorms brought back memories, mornings when unexpected sounds made her reach for the derringer she still carried. But she was healing, day by day, season by season. "Play something happy," someone called out. "This is a wedding, not a funeral." Rosalie laughed and raised her violin, launching into a lively tune that soon had everyone dancing again. Elias watched her. This remarkable woman who'd survived so much and still found joy to share. When she finished and held out her hand to him for a dance, he took it without hesitation. They danced as the stars came out, as their guests gradually departed with good wishes and knowing smiles. Finally, it was just them and the vast Wyoming night, the ranch settling into peaceful quiet around them, months later, as autumn painted the mountains gold and red. Elias found Rosalie in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. She moved carefully, one hand on her growing belly where their child grew. "Doc Morrison says everything looks fine," she told him, smiling at his worried expression. "Stop fretting. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," he said, helping her to her feet. "Not carrying my child." They walked together toward the house, baskets full of the earth's bounty. A rider was approaching on the main road, and they paused to watch. Old habits dying hard. But it was only the mail carrier, bringing letters and news from the outside world. There was a package from Denver, a photograph from their wedding day, showing them standing together, her in that ivory dress, him looking proud and protective beside her. There was also a letter from Tom McClure, updating them on his work bringing law to the territories, and one from a cousin of Rosalie's in Boston, who'd somehow heard of her marriage and wanted to reconnect. "Look at that," Rosalie said wonderingly. "I have family again, different from before, but family all the same." That evening, as they sat by the fire, her knitting tiny clothes while he mended harness, Elias thought about the strange paths that had brought them together. A forged letter, a desperate flight, a woman seeking any escape, and a man who'd forgotten how to live. Now they were building something neither had dared dream of. A future, a family, a love strong enough to weather any storm. "What are you thinking?" Rosalie asked, looking up from her knitting. "About names," he said. "If it's a boy, I was thinking Thomas, after your father, and if it's a girl, Clara." Rosalie finished softly. "Yes, I'd like that." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, gentle and clean, but inside was warmth and light, and the quiet contentment of two people who'd found their way through darkness to each other. Elias reached over to take his wife's hand, scarred but strong, like everything about her. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For knocking on my door, for refusing to leave, for bringing me back to life." She squeezed his hand, her wedding ring catching the firelight. "Thank you for opening that door, for seeing past the scared, broken woman to who I could be, for giving me a home." They sat together as the snow fell harder, transforming the ranch into a white wonderland. Soon enough there would be calving season and planting time, the eternal cycle of ranch life. There would be a child to raise, perhaps more to follow. There would be ordinary days and extraordinary ones, sorrows and joys they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, there was just this: the crackle of the fire, the whisper of snow against windows, and two hearts beating as one in a small house on the vast Wyoming plain. Two people who'd saved each other, who'd fought for their chance at happiness and won. The violin sat in its case in the corner, waiting to fill the house with music again. The photograph from Denver would join Clara's on the mantel, past and present living in harmony. And in the spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the hillsides, there would be new life to celebrate, new stories to begin. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, Elias and Rosalie Monroe sat together in perfect contentment, their love story written in scars and trust, in courage and choice. They'd traveled hard roads to find each other, but every step had been worth it for this. A simple evening at home, together, free and unafraid. In the Bighorn Valley, where the wind sang ancient songs and the mountains stood eternal watch, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their pasts. And that, perhaps, was the greatest love story of all. Not the fairy tale of perfect people finding perfect love, but the true tale of broken hearts learning to beat again, together. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, hiding the scars of old battles under its gentle grace, and in their little house, warm with love and bright with hope, Elias and Rosalie Monroe held tight to each other and to the future they'd fought so hard to claim. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive through your own frontier? Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Elias and Rosalie's journey in the comments below. Your stories and connections make our campfire circle complete.